Hello, welcome. My name is Megan Fontanella, and I'm a curator of modern art and provenance at the Solomon Art Guggenheim Museum in New York. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on building relationships with individual donors. This webinar is organized as part of the AAMC's mentorship program, and I would like to take a moment to thank the AAMC's Career Support Committee for organizing this webinar and all the webinar series. The co-chairs Michelle Jacques and Christina Nielsen were tremendous support, as was Hannah Tusky, Program Manager, and Judith Pinero, Executive Director. So in live time, we will be addressing current mentees of the mentorship program, but the webinar will be later available on the AAMC website. The webinar is essentially a conversation, and I do encourage you to ask questions in the dialog box on your screen if you are joining us in live time. And we'll begin our discussion with a conversation among the speakers today. As the session develops, I will pose more questions from the mentees. So again, my name is Megan Fontanella, and I will be moderating the session today. And I'm joined here by two distinguished speakers. We have Katherine Hart, Senior Curator of Collections, and the Barbara C. and Harvey P. Hood, 1918 Curator of Academic Programming at the Hood Museum at Dartmouth College. We also have Ron Platt, Chief Curator at the Grand Rapids Art Museum in Grand Rapids, Michigan, or GRAM. And you can find more biographical information about both of our panelists on the AAMC website. I'm just going to give you very brief background and then invite Kathy and Ron to speak to you directly. But Kathy has been with the Hood Museum since 1990, and she serves as head of the museum's curatorial and collection management departments. And Ron has been with GRAM since 2014, and he previously held curatorial positions at the Weatherspoon Art Museum at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, the Southeastern Center of Contemporary Art in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and the List Visual Arts Center at MIT. So between the two of them, we have a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and I anticipate a really lively discussion this afternoon. So today's panel, as I said, is about building relationships, and Kathy and Ron will in turn be providing more perspective about their positions at their current institutions and how they do go about forging these really sustained relationships with any number of donors, whether smaller membership initiatives or larger high-level patrons. So at this time, I will invite Kathy to begin the conversation today with some more thoughts about her background and her role at the Hood Museum. Kathy, I think you're muted. Kathy, I think we're still having trouble hearing from you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, exactly. Great.
Can you hear me now? Can you?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me now. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, I've held many roles here at the Hood Museum of Art, including which indicates I'm working very closely with education and integration of the collections into the curriculum. I've also held curatorial roles, worked with guest scholars and curators, and as interim director twice, I've worked very much with the museum, both monetarily and also with collections. So it's been I've had a variety of positions and had the opportunity to vision of museum from a number of different aspects.
Terrific. Ron, would you like to give an introduction to your role at GRAM?
Sure. Hello, and
Mute
Megan,
still?
thanks for including me in this conversation. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Great. I've been at GRAM as chief curator since 2014, and my roles here are to develop the exhibitions program, whether organizing exhibitions or bringing in traveling exhibitions. And I have a department of about 7 people that I lead. And then I'm also a member of the museum's upper management team. And we have a collection, so another role is to sort of lead the exhibition or the installation of that, and to add to it when possible, and to partner with the director and the director of advancement on donor relations.
Terrific. And Ron, you know, you've held a number of positions as well at different institutions, and how have you approached your role now at Graham? And as you say, you are part of this leadership committee, or leadership team rather. Undoubtedly, when you first came to Graham, you took time to understand the landscape of Western Michigan and the different philanthropic and communities endeavors. So how have you approached this new role as chief curator and being part of that leadership team?
Definitely connecting with the community, just like right off the bat, is really important. You know, I think it's important to establish relationships with other institutions and with other individuals in the field and in the education community as well, because I think our focus on learning is sort of crucial to what we do. And I think to just sort of like, you know, integrate yourself into the web of the community as much as possible. And Grand Rapids is not an enormous city by any means. It's like the whole metro area is probably 1 million. And so there's a lot of overlap in the sort of support network as well. And I think those people who support Graham like to see us out and part of the community and among those other people and institutions that they're supporting as well.
Terrific. And Kathy, if I may pose a question to you, I mean, so much, the hood is, of course, at Dartmouth, and so much of your work is liaisoning with the university community and undoubtedly development interests that the university may have. And so can you speak to that a bit more, and how, in addition, your alumni may or may not serve as a natural base for your fundraising efforts?
Yeah, they're very centrally interested in the college as a whole, are interested in the museum in the sense that it represents the college, is sort of a brand of the college. And they also did in, obviously, some of them are collectors, they're interested in collecting, but their mission also is, or their main interest is also the education of Dartmouth. So we position ourselves as a teaching museum, and everything we do sort of serves that goal. And most of the alumni are also connected to larger museums.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to also see if we can play a lot of times where we're trying to prove that we're relevant to a sort of a larger national sort of sister museums, as the case may be.
Mm-hmm. And how do you face those challenges? You know, the Hanover, New Hampshire, being in more isolated or, you know, farther from urban centers, and with so many of your natural donor base being not in the city in which you're located, and how do you, you know, maintain those relationships from farther afield?
Well, communication is very important, and maintaining sort of a constant communication with our to reach those people who are far away and you're less relevant to their day-to-day life. So part of that in a way in which they might sort of find out about what we're doing. And that happens with travel. A lot of us do a lot of travel, academic museums. We try to do things like alumni events in other cities. where we're explaining projects, and often team up with faculty and do those types of events with faculty. So there's a real connection between us in the college. That we demonstrate that to our constituents. But it is a challenge. It is a challenge because sometimes people are far away and they may not come, they may come to reunions only once. So it's important when they do get on campus that we're there to meet and greet them and to talk to them and really sort of talk to them individually about their interests.
Mm-hmm. And you did, Kathy, hold or have the role of director twice, as you mentioned earlier. Did you find there were different challenges you faced or different approaches you took to building relationships with donors when you were director versus curator, or how do you see them going hand in hand at a smaller institution like the Hood? Could you speak to that a little bit further?
Yeah, well, there are, as a director, you all of a sudden begin to have a bit of a bigger picture. My role, I sort of learned from those 2 stints of being a director. I learned a lot about how the larger mission of the museum as a curator or somebody in charge of collections, and see how the collections and collections development and education about collections fit. So wearing those different hats has really helped gain that perspective. And often I try to be less siloed in my thinking because of it. I think more broadly about the collections because of it. And that has indeed helped when I need to talk to donors. And I think that that's one of the things that's really aided me in my ability to communicate in the development of the collections.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point. And Ron, to turn back to you, I'm interested in thinking about smaller level donors and how we as curators can really help strengthen an institution in terms of its membership and really thinking out of the box. And at Graham, certainly, I've watched you over the past few years and how you have connected with your community and really seen, Grand Rapids as a city is evolving and growing, and what are your different strategies, for connecting with, smaller level patrons and really perhaps thinking outside the box in terms of membership?
That's a great question, and I think it's something that we think about a lot. We're not so locked in that we have a real niche focus. So I think we allow ourselves to try different things in terms of reaching people, different kinds of programs, as long as we sort of keep it real simple, like, why are we doing this? Does it relate to our mission? And so I think that's one way we're able to sort of reach more people, by trying different kinds of things. I think also there is sort of more integration here than I think at a lot of places. We don't have the kind of siloing of departments, because I think the upper level management team is, for me, I think of it as sort of one of the 2 teams I'm on here. Besides the curatorial department team is the management team as well. So I'm always getting input and feedback from the leadership of the other departments, and sort of taking their considerations and ideas into account. And so, but really, in order to reach members, you need to be accessible. And I like speaking during exhibitions and being at events, and so it's sort of being out there too is a big part of it.
Absolutely. Kathy, do you have anything to add in terms of driving membership, or how we can kind of connect with our communities a bit more?
In driving membership, I think that the curators are ambassadors, and a lot of membership at all different levels love contact with curators. And so making oneself available is extremely, and to be able to have give the sense to your donors or your membership at different levels that they have access to the scenes in the museum, and they can see what you're doing and the reasons why you're doing those things. So I think that it's a fact that's quite important.
That's really an excellent point about providing access, and I think so often our advancement or development colleagues really do, call upon curators to lead tours, to provide, behind the scenes access, and it can be a real challenge to kind of, juggle the demands of cultivation activities versus your scholarship or, other projects that you may have. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ron? How you kind of wear these different hats? I mean, they're both quite critical. Obviously, you have to carry on with your day-to-day work, but cultivation certainly has I would say in recent years, even more so, become part of the curator's job, that you really have to be out there as the face of the institution.
Yeah, it's true. And I would say that with cultivation, it's usually for us either driven by needing to get to know people better because of maybe their collections, and so there are different ways to sort of approach people from that perspective. And I think to be sort of goal-oriented and strategic keeps things focused and allows you to sort of divide up your time a little more efficiently. And I think also it helps me tremendously to be working so closely with the director and our director of advancement. So we are kind of like tag team with donor relationships.
Terrific. And both of you are obviously in senior leadership positions, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts for curators who may be earlier in their careers, or how they may partner with curators in positions such as yourself or senior leadership, or how that may change at a large institution versus a smaller institution. And maybe Kathy can tackle this question. So what strategies you might suggest for curators who are earlier in their career? Have we lost Kathy? Maybe I'll turn this one to Ron, if you don't mind jumping in.
Okay, so advice for curators earlier in their careers.
Or perhaps what you wish you earlier in your career, had done more of.
Well, I wish I had done more traveling earlier in my career, but I guess really I'm sort of grateful for the earliest opportunities I had at feeling like I was in a kind of a less hierarchical organization, and that I had a voice that mattered, and that's, I think, important to developing confidence, and also sort of getting accustomed to dialogue, and I think it's always helped me sort of in team building as well. So I would say having some flexibility in what you're doing at an organization. One of the benefits of working at a smaller organization is you tend to sort of know what everybody is doing. And, if you start out at as a curatorial assistant, as I did at a smaller organization, I was doing everything. And so now I know what people do along the way, and I think that helps in terms of just sort of realizing all the components of what's going on in a situation.
Absolutely. I think having that nimbleness to be able to talk about other projects in addition to your own, to see what's going on in the conservation lab, to see what your partners in education, you know, are thinking for public programs. It certainly makes you able to, you know, be that ambassador for the institution in so many respects when you are in a situation where you're with trustees or with possible donors, that you can really speak to a broad range of projects. And junior or senior, just making yourself more informed about what's going on in your institution is never a bad thing, certainly. Kathy, are you back with us?
I had one other thought. I mean, I don't want to take her air if she's so should I go ahead?
Yeah, please.
You know, I would say another thing that was helpful to me is the idea of mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some really tremendous teachers along the way, people I worked with primarily, but people, you know, at other institutions who would reach out and really let me know that I could contact them. It's nice to know that you have options. You can reach out and talk to people. And so I try now that I'm in a more senior position to also provide those kinds of opportunities for younger people, whether it's artists or young curators or people who are, you know, interested in museum work. It's nice to have to be in a position where you can, you know, use that information and experience.
Absolutely. And so much when one thinks about cultivating, you know, higher level patrons, that can be a situation as a junior curator where you're less comfortable with. So having a mentor who really helps guide you through that steps or takes you, you know, with them on a collection visit, to really see a pro in action, you know, how one does represent your institution, does convey their mission, and to learn from that is so critical. I would absolutely agree. Kathy, would you like to jump in and offer any thoughts? Perhaps maybe thinking about a more higher level. Most institutions have some sort of trustee, board of directors, an advisory group, and how that group of really individuals who are so closely aligned with the institution, how that can be a prime, you know, source of support for your projects, advocacy, and obviously a natural financial base as well. Would you like to speak to that relationship?
Yes. The board is very important, as you said, and they provide financial support for projects. And another is that they are, as you said before, not only to your constituents, but also to your administration in the case of an academic museum. So we be transparent also with the board, and we make sure they know what kind of acquisitions we're making, what kind of sort of projects we're involved with, and we ask for their support, but also for their advice. If you have a board and you do not take advantage of a number of or their connections, I think you are missing out a great deal. So the board is important in a number of respects. And often board members have collections, and so you're stewarding those collections as well.
Mm-hmm. And how do you go about, you know, once you do have this relationship with, whether it's a board member or a high-level patron who does have a collection that you see could possibly come to the institution at some point, or, you know, in some way, shape, or form, be an asset to your institution? How do you navigate that relationship? Because I think that is a tricky one of, you know, when to make an ask, when not to, how far to push it, or how else you can benefit from that relationship, just in terms of loans or, again, support.
the board member can often make demands or on you as an institution, and that sometimes is one of those things one needs to navigate with some delicacy. But I think it's okay for curators to, since they've often sort of indicated that those collections could come to your institution, it's important that the board members really do understand your stated goals and strategic development of all sorts of things, including collections and exhibition projects. So that's something that you can get a great deal of advantage from, sort of leveraging, that relationship. And I think that boards really understand that the primary things for an institution that has collections.
Ron, do you maybe want to address this question as well, as because I think it's a difficult one of how one goes about navigating collections and thinking about growing your own collection, and how you approach those relationships in a positive way.
Yeah, it is a bit complex. I mean, I think it helps to have a good sense of reading people just socially. I think is very helpful, and that's also where being a part of a team is very beneficial. Somebody else might observe an interaction or have a lot more experience with a particular individual, and that's always gives you a little confidence going into like a meeting or some sort of a social situation. I agree with what Kathy was saying about really sort of knowing what your goals are in terms of collection building. What are you looking for? If somebody's going to ask a number of questions, and a number of trustees and collectors will ask questions and be very upfront, and it's terrific to have access to them. But access also, I think, you need to take advantage of those situations. Sometimes it feels a little bit like being tested, but if you're prepared with answers, and again, what Kathy said about transparency and not make promises about, what you might do, and then have the accountability back at the institution, and be aware of your limitations and what you're able to do, whether it's storage or how much you can exhibit at one time, or security. All those things, all those factors are really important, and you sort of need to think them through and know the answers to those sorts of things, so you're not sort of caught flat-footed in dealing with people.
I think that's an excellent point, because so often one has a relationship with a patron who does have relationship with other institutions, and so you don't want to get into a situation where you're over-promising, or as you say, aren't quite sure what your institution can offer to that patron. You want to make sure the relationship is on the same footing, and you aren't again over promising in the competition that might arise. And I think that's oftentimes individuals who are interested in your institution are interested in a lot of other institutions, whether it's a art museum or a music endeavor or something else. Is they're arts patrons for a reason, and so you have your relationship with them, but there's also competing interests, whether it's financial or collection wise, and so one does have to kind of honor your relationship with that individual and be respectful of their other relationships, certainly. Do you want to tackle this question too, Kathy, maybe, of how one does navigate competing interests a bit, because again, the Hood Museum, you are looking to patrons who are further afield and who are aligned with other institutions.
Yeah, I think that often it's, I think each donor is different, and so they all need to be sort of dealt with just like you do with individuals with people. They all have different sort of agendas in terms of, or sort of interest in terms of their relationship with you. That often it's building that relationship over time. One understands that donor, and one can make a pitch to them. It speaks to your own knowledge of them and what they want. We have some very high level alums who are also very involved in other museums, and one has to gauge over time what's going to be even possible with that donor, and not put them off by expectations of what you have for them, but also just so make sure they know what you're doing and develop time not to jump your fences too fast, so to speak. But for many of the donors, they have time for both you and other museums. Where it gets tricky is that they might have much higher profile at another museum in general for their role than they would in a more academic museum. But you know, it doesn't mean necessarily that they can't help you in smaller ways. You don't give up on that necessarily.
Mm-hmm. And how do you handle a situation, this is perhaps for either one of you to respond to, where you do have a patron that you've cultivated over a number of years who has perhaps dangled the collection in front of you, but won't make any promises or any commitments, and you know, how do you know when to continue to pursue that collection, or you know, politely redirect your efforts elsewhere, because it is a lot of time and effort, cultivation activities. And so how do you kind of navigate that?
Kathy, maybe I'll take a stab. You really do need to know the people.
Why don't you?
And I think, again, I keep coming back to the team, but again, I'm also not like sort of like the lead person here when it comes to donor relationships, but just to sort of have the support, the knowledge, and you know, the opportunity to rely on colleagues. Like the institutional memory is very important.
Absolutely.
I've been here not quite 4 years, and so there's institutional history with a lot of individuals who I've only known for 3 years, you know, that might go back 10 and 20. So it's good to know when they bring something up, like maybe they or bring a little resentment about something that happened 10 years ago. It's probably good to figure out what that is, and so maybe you don't end up repeating the same sort of thing. But there are disappointments along the way. I mean, just as much as there are small successes and every once in a while big successes, there are disappointments and hopefully not disasters, because those don't play out well within the institution or in the press, I suppose, as well. So it's, you know, caution and professionalism and transparency, I think, are paramount.
Absolutely. And do you have anything to add, Kathy, in terms of, you know, when to step away, when you, you know, have a relationship, even if it's not a collection on the table, but just a relationship that perhaps hasn't been a productive one, or hasn't, you know, led to deeper engagement from that individual?
sometimes these things become mutual. You know, over time, they may still be interested in you, and you can arm to be answering an email or talking on the phone for a few minutes or being polite. I think interest in your museum, you can pick up after a number of months and still connect with somebody, and nothing makes, I think you still have that connection and that engagement. So I don't tend to give up on donors, like me, or give up on the institution.
I think that's a good strategy. I think it's sometimes people can surprise you, and again, there's relationships both big and small, and so sometimes there's relationships that help, again, support projects that you're really excited about, or help bring funding towards collection stewardship, you know, less flashy or outward-facing projects, but that are quite meaningful, or that can be translated, you know, redirected into a book project, or again, a conservation treatment, or something on a smaller scale, if you see that the large, you know, deep investment is not going to come to fruition. There's certainly different ways you can redirect relationships. I'm curious too with Ron, since you have fairly recently to Graham, were there relationships that you had established at earlier institutions or earlier in your career that you were able to bring with you to Graham, or how did you navigate those waters of relationships you had already developed at other institutions, or did you not? Did you kind of start fresh with Grand Rapids?
I would say more the latter. I think there are probably a few people who are more collectors, who, you know, like to hear about what we're doing here. You have to try to be realistic in terms of knowing where their primary allegiances are. So I think I've learned at this point not to make ridiculous asks, because it doesn't sound professional. But on the other hand, you don't want to assume that people aren't interested in still supporting you. I think one of the primary things about donor relations is that you maintain the relationship, and you're not getting in touch with them just when you want something.
Yes.
But that you have some interest in them as individuals, at least in what they're supporting. And also, you know, if you run into somebody out in public, and then, you know, you're not off duty necessarily. I think that those relationships have to kind of be maintained whenever you're out there. Yeah, it's just the nature of them.
I agree. I think that sincere engagement is really critical, and what Kathy said earlier too about, you know, inviting patrons to come behind the scenes to really have that insider knowledge, to see what you're doing. The transparency that comes with it is really critical in making it a sincere engagement, that it really, you know, you're not just asking them for money or collection, or, you know, that you want them to be aligned with your institution. You want them to be advocates for your institution. It is quite critical. I am curious, since you know, again, patrons are aligned with multiple institutions, and Ron, you are in a city where there are other types of museums, though not necessarily art museum. There's the sculpture gardens. Do you ever partner with other institutions or other curators or other institutions if there is a donor or donor group that is a shared interest? How do you navigate those waters of kind of sister institutions, if you will?
We haven't I haven't yet. I mean, for some reason, the first thing that popped into my mind was maybe like a joint acquisition. And I can't think of an instance like that. We were sort of working towards organizing an exhibition between joint institutions, and that, you know, for different reasons, didn't work out. But that I was thinking of that as a real learning opportunity to sort of see how we would do things. But I think that what we were all excited about was the fact that the donors would be excited for that sort of collaboration between institutions. But I actually don't have a lot to say in response to that question. Sorry.
That's okay. Kathy, I'm curious if you have any thoughts, if you've tried to partner with other institutions or other curators, if you did see a shared interest, or what you might do, again, to kind of reach out of your community a bit more.
Well, there are a number of ways in which one can partner. One can partner with other institutions on exhibitions, and with an academic museum, you can reach to the alums in that institution, in that city. And we've done that very frequently. Your local community, if you have arts organizations, I think often donors are in smaller communities are involved in arts organizations. And because of that, if you are also seen, and also it's good, if you partner with them, that you see you have a common goal to support the arts for the people who live in your area. And that has been, we've got local alumni donors who appreciate that.
That's an excellent way to reach out, you know, thinking about when your institution is outside of your, you know, on the road, if you will, at other museums, whether it's an exhibition or a lecture you might be giving, or some way that you can invite those that you don't see on a regular basis, alumni or patrons or whatnot, to come and see you and see, you know, the institution and the ways that it's connecting and collaborating. I think patrons always, as Ron said, enjoy collaborations, and to see that cooperation among different museums is really healthy and can be quite positive. And we talked a bit about alumni and how they can serve as a base. I wondered, Kathy, if you might speak a bit more about, if you haven't covered this already, but about competition with resources at in a university setting, or is there less competition? You know, how do you navigate asks for the university versus asks for the museum? And you are in the midst of opening a beautiful new museum, and how did you kind of navigate those waters when you were essentially going through a major capital campaign?
Well, we were very lucky. It's not an ambitious, I mean, it's ambitious in the sense that it's a brand new, that's a $50 million project, unlike Harvard's 450. But it's a substantial portion of our money we needed for the expansion came from our board.
Okay.
They really were putting their resources toward us. The college has aided us with helping us, donors who are not initially part of our sort of family, but are still alums, and we've had several substantial department. So it's good to play well in the sandbox with your development department if you're in academic museums. You see, you see not adversarial, but sort of siloed relationships, because it can get a little bit college academic development department often forbid you to contact some donors because they have them in mind for bigger projects.
Mm-hmm.
But we've had a good relationship with our advancement department to reach our goal. We have almost reached it. We're just several $1 million, just a few $1 million short. And so we're almost there, the project. And it's really been, the advancement department has been very helpful making connections for us.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Yeah.
I think even if you're not at a university art museum,
Thank you.
Run feels as competing resources, and whether the ask is for your project or it's being reserved for another project, and how you kind of navigate those waters. And as Ron has said multiple times, it's very good advice. Having those communications and collaborations and understanding everyone's needs is really critical in not stepping on toes, but really, you know, being transparent about what you're looking for and what other people might need. I am curious too, well, I will just say that we are open to questions. So if any of the mentees want to pose questions, please keep them coming. But I was hoping, Ron, because you do work with, as does Kathy, with contemporary artists, how can artists be patrons of an institution? Obviously, we're looking to collect their work, to collaborate on exhibitions, but they're very real relationships that we do cultivate, living artists. And if you could kind of speak to that a bit more, whether it's, you know, donations of gifts of art through artists or other means.
Yeah. Artist relationships are fascinating and fun, and I get a lot of energy and you know, I would say intellectual stimulation out of them as well. I think artists are some of the smartest people, and a lot of them are really engaged in the world beyond the studio in terms of making their work. And for better or for worse, you know, artists who succeed often have to spend a certain amount of time working on the sales and promotion of their work. And so a lot of them are quite savvy in those terms. I think relationships with artists, I try to maintain relationships with artists that I've had, and some for, you know, decades now. And you know, some of them are very generous and will offer work to the institution or discounts. You mentioned something about acquiring work from exhibitions, I believe, and that's something we believe in really strongly. I mean, if we care and if we're interested enough to exhibit the work of an artist, then you know, we ought to be able to put our money where our mouth is, especially for one person exhibitions. So, but you know, you also can't let friendly relationships get in the way of professional relationships, and sometimes you have to say no thank you. And you know, that's just part of being a grown-up. Artists also have relationships with collectors, and so I've actually met some donors through artists, and so very good relationships to maintain.
That's an excellent point. Oftentimes artists are gateways to various donors, or you see that relationship very much going hand in hand. Kathy, I know you work with contemporary artists as well, and you grow the Hoods collection, you know, through your activities working with contemporary artists. Do you have anything to add on this front as well?
Yes, I think our donors and community members, they like much when you introduce them to new artists or upcoming artists. I think they get excited about being closed. I know our board members, when an artist that is not well known, but they think the work is interesting, and you have sort of proven that through either exhibition or acquisition, they get interested, and I think that that's a benefit to donors. They want to jump on the bandwagon. It's the sort of unstated way that museums and are involved in influencing the art, which is always, that's a whole nother subject, but it exists. But there are also donors who are very interested in the fact that you're giving them contact with bigger named artists who are later on in their career and have more exposure. Very exciting for donors to have that type of contact. And that's one of the things artists are very generous about doing for us, and I know for other, is they're very willing to talk to not only students and faculty at Dartmouth, but they're interested in talking to your donors if they happen to be around. So I think that that's a benefit from that relationship, because people are really interested in the art of the now. Not, but there are many sort of people who are more open to what's going on now, and I think there's a real sort of excitement around that.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you touched upon this a little bit, but this idea of access and giving access to artists is so critical. If you aren't working with contemporary projects, you know, what are the ways in which you make your collection accessible? So particularly in this moment where, Kathy, your museum has been under this renovation project, how do you really activate your collections that are in storage? I'm assuming that you do. And what are the ways that you really use your collections to kind of build those relationships?
Well, we have this project called Hood Downtown. So we renovated a old jewelry shop on Main Street in town. We have been continuing a series of contemporary exhibitions that has helped us. And actually, not who've had some access to what we're doing while we've been closed are our board members, our students and faculty, and have not seen anything of the collection while we've been closed. However, how they are seeing it is that we've lent 100 about to other museums while we're closed. Okay. And there has been some activity with our director. I think we could have done more of that, but that was the plan, was to engage people with collections on the road. So one of our slows at home, which is downtown, Hood on the road, Hood online. So those are ways in which we were trying to make our presence closed.
Great. So to switch topics a little bit, Ron, I'm interested in whether you do or don't have committees at Graham that kind of serve different cultivation purposes, whether it's you know, collecting committees or collection stewardship committees, or exhibition, you know, leadership committees, and how your institution maybe has effectively used those as ways to cultivate new relationships or kind of sustain existing ones.
We have an accessions committee. We're made up of members of the board, and we meet every 2 months, and we present proposed acquisitions to them, both gifts and purchases, and it's a really important committee to the museum. A number of the members are collectors as well. We want to maintain close and deep relationships with these people. So when we use those committee meetings to hear what they think about sort of what we're doing. So we always build time into the meetings for some discussion around acquisitions.
Mm-hmm.
They do help us raise funds, whether it's through their own personal monies or in sort of generating enthusiasm among their friends or associates. And so that's a very important committee to us. It's crucial also because if they're not behind our mission and our collection plan, they wouldn't be enthusiastic about what we're presenting. So, we have a big responsibility to them, and so I take that relationship very seriously.
And there was a question, Ron, as to whether a patron has to pay a membership fee to be part of the committee. You don't have to disclose a fee, but they don't pay a fee. Okay.
They don't.
So they interest.
Just already need to be a member of the museum board.
Okay. And Kathy, what do you have at the Hood? Do you have a similar structure where you, beyond the board level, have subcommittees that are interested in various activities at the institution, or not necessarily?
We have a patron group. That patron group is a group of fellows, and we provide for them. So they join the museum, and their sort of interest in the museum is sort of sustained through sort of special and sort of information about what we're doing, more inside information. And that group has existed for now 27 years. We also we do give sort of special events for our and that sort of patronage, but we have no acquisition group. I know a lot of museums have special groups. We've discussed it, maybe a special photography group, because there's a lot of interest in photography, but we don't have a special acquisitions group. Our acquisitions committee is development and faculty.
Thank you. So we just have a couple minutes left. If there's any final questions from the mentees, we can try to field those in the last minute we have left. Otherwise, I'd like to just invite Ron and Kathy, if you have any closing remarks, anything you felt you didn't cover, no pressure. But if there's anything else you wanted to add on the topic.
I would say that we're fortunate to have a network of colleagues, regionally, nationally, in some cases internationally, and all of our institutions are very alike and very different. And I try whenever possible to reach out and get advice and feedback and suggestions from colleagues. And I mean, this in a way is very much in that spirit, and I appreciate being able to take part in this, but I'm learning too, just from the questions I'm getting and from hearing what the two of you have to say.
Thank you. Do you have anything, Kathy, in closing that you'd like to add?
Yes, I do want to add that supporters, donors, it's very important for your museum to support the curators by having policy and crafted policies that allow the curator to refer to them when they're saying no about something, or whether they're supporting something. It's a very hard thing for curators and feel isolated when dealing with problems or with issues where there might be a conflict of interest, or there is pressure being brought to bear on the institution and on the individual curator. So the better written and stated the policy, their leadership adheres or sort of supports those policies, the more you will be able to do your job well and that is professional. So that's the only other thing I would say. I feel that if you don't have policies in place and try to, it's a problem.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Ron and Kathy. This was such a great discussion, and I hope everyone who was listening took away some great strategies and advice for building relationships, because at the end of the day, so much of our job is about these relationships, sustained engagement, and really a sincere engagement. So with that, I'm going to close out this webinar, and thank you all once again. Bye.